Welcome to our last topic of the semester. We're coming full circle, back to one of the first things we considered at the beginning of the semester, which was the topic of intersectionality and the matrix of privilege and oppression. We began by recognizing that all of these different sources of stratification, whether it be gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, or class, they all intersect with one another, such that there is no single perspective on issues of gender, for example, because sexual orientation, race, and class all shape people's experience of gender, and vice versa. But then, as we proceeded through the semester, we largely examined these forms of stratification independently of one another in order to simplify the examination process. Now it's time to bring them all together again and consider how they intersect in meaningful ways within the structural arrangements of society. To do this, we'll reframe our focus on intersectionality in terms of what are known as the domains of power. But first, let's place this notion of power within the context of social stratification. Together, gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, and class create our social order. Each one of them, not to mention others we didn't cover, such as ability, religion, language, immigration status, and so on, each one of them is an integral part of the hierarchical system in our society. The ideal we have in our society, that all people are created equal, is merely that, an ideal. It's something we aspire to, but it clearly isn't the reality. Inequality has been built right into our social system, and even our legal system from the very beginning. Using Marxian terminology, this ideal is an ideology that masks the fundamental inequality in our society. Ultimately, power is used to uphold the gender, sexual, racial, and class order of our society. Anyone who deviates from the normative expectations for their race, gender, or our system of heteronormativity, for example, is immediately sanctioned, not only by the law, but by our own individual reactions to them, even if it's something as simple as staring at them. This is where the different isms we've studied this semester come from: racism, sexism, heterosexism, classism, including both their interpersonal and institutionalized dimensions. They are an integral part of our social order. However, most people just accept the social order as it is. This is especially true of those who benefit most from the systems of stratification we have in place. But as we've seen with the concepts of internalized sexism, internalized homophobia, internalized racism, and the belief in the system of meritocracy, even many of those who are oppressed accept the social order as just the way things are. For many people, the existing social order is simply second nature. But once again, what is second nature is not natural. We take it for granted. We made it up, and we have to live with the consequences of the system we created. Ultimately, stratification is all about preserving the social order and the existing power structures within society. Sociologist Patricia Hill-Collins has made this the focus of her research in her examination of the position of Black women in particular in our society, though her analysis is revealing about power and stratification regardless of the population under study. She starts by distinguishing between two different approaches to power, or ways of understanding power. The first is known as the dialectical approach to power, an idea that can be traced back to Marx. In other words, there's a dialectical relationship linking oppression and activism. This approach highlights how different groups often have competing interests, which results in conflict. Ultimately, those with greater power oppress those who have less power. However, those who are oppressed are motivated to challenge that system of oppression. In other words, when individuals begin to exercise their own agency, their ability to act in the world, the result is activism aimed at social change. The value of this dialectical approach for understanding power is that it fosters solidarity within the group, a variation of Marx's idea of class consciousness. And this solidarity is necessary for resisting oppression. So, the dialectical approach to power is important in that it highlights the need for solidarity among the oppressed in order to effectively challenge systems of domination, but is not the only way to understand power dynamics. A different way to look at power is through what is considered the subjectivity approach. From this perspective, power is not something that groups possess. Instead, it's a kind of intangible quality that circulates among people based on their relative position within society. One's position within society is based on what you've already learned is called the matrix of domination. Notice that the name of the matrix is different now. Instead of the matrix of privilege and oppression that comes from the work of Wells Barnett and Cooper, Collins calls it the matrix of domination. Either way, this concept of the matrix encompasses the many combinations of race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and other divisions within society. Remember that different people are more or less marginalized, more or less privileged, based on the specific combination of these characteristics that they have. So, power is considered to be relative to one's position within this matrix. This also means that power is subjectively experienced. This approach also acknowledges that oppression is constantly changing, which means that a person's subjective experience of both power and oppression shifts depending on the specific context or circumstances. As Collins describes it, and I'm quoting here, a Black woman's gender may be more prominent when she becomes a mother, her race when she searches for housing, her social class when she applies for credit, her sexual orientation when she is walking with her lover, and her citizenship status when she applies for a job. So, in some of these situations, she is experiencing marginalization and oppression, but in others, she may be experiencing privilege. Everyone is constantly shifting around in terms of power relations depending on the social context, and this means that their experience of power and oppression shifts with it. Overall, while the dialectical approach fosters group solidarity, the subjectivity approach emphasizes how domination and resistance shape and are shaped by individual agency. In fact, if we are going to work for change in society, we need both. We need both group solidarity and a sense of individual agency if we are going to effectively challenge systems of oppression. To wrap this up, the dialectical and subjectivity approaches are often presented as competing rather than complementary approaches to understanding power. Collins, however, emphasizes how neither one is sufficient and instead they must be used together. In other words, we need a strong sense of individual agency just as much as we need a sense of solidarity with those who face oppressions just as we do.